another Americans for Limited Government live stream. I'm here today with Rick Manning, president of Americans for Limited Government. And we want to get right to the point today. What is the political landscape looking like for the midterms 2022? We're seeing all sorts of headlines that the Democrats are radioing in Houston. We have a problem. They have a lot of problems, in fact. And so, Rick, I want to get your take on all of this. But let's start by reacting to a little setup video. This is David Drucker. He's one of the senior political reporters at the Washington Examiner, and he has had a very good read on all of this. So he made some statements recently. We'll watch that, and then we'll see what Rick has to say. So stand by.
Is stuck with poor approval ratings. It's almost like the harder it is to dig out, because the point of view of how the president is doing and what people think of him personally, those views begin to harden over time, and it's not just as simple as going one way one day and one way the next. And then you look at redistricting, which is yet another metric. Republicans have done very well in the decennial reapportionment process, where the states that gain seats tend to be Republican states, the states that lost seats tend to be Republican states. But even in just places where the maps were redrawn, like Ohio's losing a seat, maybe two, can't remember, but it's become such a Republican state over the past decade or so that all of a sudden just about every seat, no matter how you draw the map, is going to be hospitable territory for the Republican Party.
Okay, so that was David Drucker saying that, one, the Democrats are going to be hurt by Joe Biden's continually low poll numbers. So, Rick, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that goes without saying. Joe Biden is an anchor on everything they're trying to do. And it's significantly different than Donald Trump, who suffered from low polling numbers in 2018. But actually, the Republicans didn't lose. It was surprising how well they did in 2018, given the numbers and the tradition. Here's the thing that's different. Donald Trump brought voters to the polls with him. When he endorsed people who otherwise wouldn't have voted would come out and vote. And those were voters that the Republicans wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But on the other hand, Joe Biden doesn't bring anybody to the polls. His number is basically at the baseline level, as low as a Democrat can go. And where the hardening is his approval number is really, really low, but the hardening's in his opposition number. And his opposition number is really kind of locking in. Essentially, the problem he's got is the independents have completely abandoned him. And if with the independents abandoning Biden and no longer having any faith that Joe Biden is the right guy to lead them, they're going to push to have somebody to offset him, and that should mean Republican gains in 2022 and 2024.
And in fact, Rick, if I can interrupt you, the poll I think you're referring to shows 44% of Americans have a positive view of President Biden. 56% have a negative view. And what you said was significant there is that there's 0% who are undecided, right?
That never happens. That never happens. I've never seen a poll where 0% were undecided. And so what you have, usually there's 2, 3, 4% who say, yeah, I don't really pay attention. I don't know. And in this case, everybody agrees. They're on one side or the other. And unfortunately for the Democrats, the side that they're on is we don't trust you to be in power. And we certainly don't entrust you to have complete control over the government. And truthfully, the American public oftentimes prefers to have divided government. And so that all plays into an expectation that the Republicans will do very well in 2022. But there's some warning signs for Republicans as well. And those warning signs are that, a lot of people aren't that enamored with the Republicans either. It's just that they're not the Democrats. And so the Republicans really have to make a case for why they deserve to be in the majority and create an alternative narrative. Because if they just sit back and say, I'm going to be in the majority, I don't have to do anything. The amount of people who are going to vote them into power, the number of seats they take will be significantly lower, and that will be bad news for being able to get anything done in 2023.
Well, Rick, I pulled up a screen here. It's a CNN political story. We have a problem here. Low morale and redistricting hand Democrats a growing retirement issue. We so far have 25 House Democrats who have announced they will retire. And the CNN article quotes Democrats still in the House saying that there's a growing morale problem as they see their colleagues leaving, and because their colleagues are in many cases in competitive seats and they don't want to deal with a huge fight. And so Democrats on the inside are just, it's not a bright, happy time for them. They're really struggling.
Well, and that's pretty common. Let me explain why this matters. And it's really, really hard to beat an incumbent. The reason it's really hard to beat an incumbent is because if they've been doing constituent services, if they've been doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, there's all sorts of people who really don't have a philosophical bent one way or the other, but they got their Social Security check after they were having a problem because the congressman intervened. They got their veterans benefits fixed. They got into a VA hospital when they otherwise were being denied because the congressman intervened. And so those kind of stories of incumbency kind of grow out and become a constituency that's completely apolitical, but is going to reward that member for having helped people in their districts over time. There's two things that work against that for the Democrats this year. And the first is when you have a number of people retiring, then the new people, it's an open seat. And that's a brand new view with two different candidates, neither with those kind of long-term ties of dealing with the federal government. And the party out of power always has a greater chance of winning in those kind of environments. It's just the incumbent. It's hard to beat an incumbent. An open seat is an open door to changing the party that represents the district. So 25 House members dropping out on the Democrat side spells very bad news for the retaining the majority. What's more, it tells you that they don't expect to retain the majority, because those senior members who are dropping out are people who are their committee chairs and their top leadership people and the top subcommittee chairs. And they're dropping out because they don't want to go back to being in the minority for another 6 to 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're losing the chairman of the Transportation Committee, the Budget Committee. I mean, these are key critical positions. And so I think, to your point, they're anticipating that they will lose those chairmanships in the next House. Here's from the CNN story. It says that actually things could get worse. It says, but as Democrats look ahead to what could become a trying midterm election cycle, the overwhelming belief is that the wave of retirements has yet to crash. So we're just at the start of this.
Yeah, I think that right now incumbents are being forced to make a decision because a lot of the primaries are in June or July, and they'll want to get out now. Some of them delay for as much as they can because they want to have the person who they favor to be the person who replaces them as the nominee. And so they want to have less of a time period for people to jump into a primary. But by and large, you probably can expect 30 to 35 Democrat retirements at this point. And once again, that matters. It not only matters because of the power of incumbency, though. It matters because you are going to be running, every single one of these people is going to be running at least a slightly altered district. And so once again, you don't have the district ties to the incumbent office. And so with a combination of the redistricting and where it goes against the incumbent and the weight of the Biden record, which is going to go against the incumbents, those two things are causing a lot of people who know a lot about how their district's going to vote to say, not me. I'm not going to face that electorate.
And Rick, as you can imagine, over on the Republican side, they're throwing a party already. Here's Michael McAdams, spokesman for the National Republican Congressional Committee. He said, every Democratic retirement demoralizes their party further and forces Democrats to spend precious resources defending competitive seats. No one wants to run as a House Democrat this cycle. But you're saying that I think Republicans need to be a little cautious there and not, claim victory already.
Yeah, there's this almost a sense of, in the on the House Republican side in particular, that if they just don't screw it up, it's going to be a great election. And so they don't really, a lot of them are arguing, don't do anything, just, curl into a ball and you're going to win, just because the weight of Joe Biden being an anchor on the Democrats will take the Democrats down for you. And so they're not willing to risk any political capital. And I would argue that's extremely dangerous, because the reason the Republicans lost control was because they curled up in a ball and didn't want to risk any political capital as a way to try to keep seats. And the American public doesn't want the Republicans in the House to just be little paperweights who are collecting a paycheck. They want them to actually do something. They want them to create the offset for what Biden's trying to do. They want to create the balance against what Biden's trying to do. And as a result, they have to start showing that they're willing to do that. And I think this is going to be the real test for Kevin McCarthy, because if he's not willing to do that, I strongly suspect there's going to be some Republicans who are going to question whether or not they want him leading a majority in 2023. And so there's going to be a real testing ground for Kevin McCarthy over the next 6 months, because if he doesn't, if they continue down a path of basically curling up a ball like a pill bug, they're going to end up being squashed like a pill bug.
And Rick, to that point, Jim Burnop on Facebook is questioning that too. I mean, spineless Republicans may not be of any use in flipping the House or the Senate. And speaking of the Senate, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Rick Scott, he pointed out this, and I thought that you might want to comment on it, that every state Biden won in 2020 by less than 10 points, so those were those very narrow victories, those are all now battleground states where there is an incumbent Democrat in the Senate trying to keep their seat. Mark Kelly in Arizona, Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, and Raphael Warnock in Georgia. He points to those four. So what are your thoughts about those 4 Senate seats in particular?
Yeah, I think they're all in play. I think people might be surprised about Nevada, but I think Nevada is definitely in play. The Arizona seat, the incumbent there, what's his name? Mark
Kelly.
Mark Kelly. I think he's the most damaged of all of them, because people didn't know what to expect from him. Kirsten Sinema from Arizona has proven to be somebody who's going to stand up for Arizonans and not allow the country to be steamrolled by the Biden and the far left agenda. Mark Kelly's been missing in action on that. And by virtue of his being basically kowtowing to the hard left in Washington, D.C., he's revealed himself not to be the person who he ran to be, and not to be anywhere near being a centrist. And I think Arizonans are going to react badly to that. Now, recognize all 4 of those seats are incumbents. And once again, those are incumbents who have the incumbent advantages. The 2 that don't have that so much are the Arizona seat and the Georgia seat, because Kelly's only been in for a year now, and Warnock's only been in for a year. And consequently, those two senators haven't developed the constituency loyalties that you get by helping people do all those things I described earlier. And that really matters. And so both of those seats are definitely in deep trouble. Hassan's seat, we don't know who's going to be running against her, but I think New Hampshire is ripe for flipping. And certainly Nevada, while it's a tougher state in some ways, the fact is, I think Nevadans, with the shutdowns that their governor has imposed upon them, they're mad. From everything I'm hearing from there, they're just mad at what's going on. And it's going to be really hard for Masto Cortez to stand up against that. If you end up with an election that is based on Nevada state law and not any emergency voting procedures.
And Rick, we've been hearing a lot in recent months that it looks like Republicans are going to have an edge in terms of redistricting these House districts because we have control of more of the state legislatures. But a new report out by the Cook Political Group, they put out these great analysis. They go very granular into these House districts. They actually are saying this after redistricting, Democrats could gain a net of 6 Democrat-leaning House districts, which that's contrary to kind of the larger narrative we've been hearing.
Yeah, a lot of the Republican states, particularly southern states, haven't actually had the redistricting maps finished yet. But right now, the maps have changed in the House to a +6 for the Democrats, according to the Cook Report analysis. And that's what the actual surprise here to some, not to me, is that the Democrats are playing for keeps. They're not sitting there saying, we're going to hold off and we're going to play by Hoyle here. No, they are drawing maps to cause Republicans in states where they lost seats, to cause Republicans to have to run against Republicans. They're creating safe Democrat seats, and as a result, you're seeing some seats that, quite honestly, you're seeing Republicans losing in states where. In districts where you wouldn't have thought they would lose because it's been redistricted in such a way that a Republican can't win. So that's why they're coming up with +6. The Democrats are playing hardball. The thing that we have to note, and this is really frustrating to me, in places like Texas and North Carolina and Florida, where the Republicans could expect to pick up a number of seats, we know that when their maps are announced, and North Carolina has been announced, when their maps are announced, that the Department of Justice is going to come in and sue those states under the Voting Rights Act. And they're already threatening to sue Texas. And you can expect that Florida will follow. The reason for that is there are only certain states that fall within the Voting Rights Act, and they tend to be states that are run by Republicans now. And as a result, the Department of Justice will use its power to try to tie up those seats. And so a redistricting map that's egregious, like the one they're trying to do in Maryland, which puts the only Republican seat in jeopardy when you legitimately should have 2 Republican seats in Maryland. The map is going to go scot-free. The DOJ doesn't care about it because it benefits Democrats. But the DOJ is going to go after the Republican states. They're going to have Republican maps. And we've seen historically that has tempered the ability for Republicans to do the same kind of redistricting and gerrymandering that Democrats regularly use to benefit themselves politically.
Rick, someone named Ron, and he calls himself Ron Reagan, but somehow I doubt it's not like the Ron Reagan, although maybe it just happens to be Ron Reagan. Anyway, primary the herd of rhinos we have in our party ASAP. Is that a tactic that you think would work for us?
I think that there have to be a number of primaries. And going back to Rick Scott, who's the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, I would let people know that the National Republican Senatorial Committee will tell you that they're going to be supporting Republicans to build a Republican majority. But he's already said that Lisa Murkowski, who faces a primary from a Republican, that Lisa Murkowski will be supported by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. So before the primaries, I'd be very, very cautious about giving money to the NRCC, National Republican Congressional Committee, or the National Republican Senatorial Committee, because that money is going to go to support the incumbents. And so if you're primarying an incumbent, you give money to the NRCC, you're giving money to somebody who opposes to the opponent in your district. So just be very wary of that. Bottom line is, it's hard to beat an incumbent, but primaries do work on occasion. And this is an environment where I think primaries can work because, quite honestly, people in the real world don't trust the people in Washington, D.C., no matter what party label they carry. They don't trust them, and they really want change.
Rick, the other thing I want to ask you about is the January 6th Nancy Pelosi's report. Apparently, they're in the drafting, the stages of writing their first initial report or of their investigation. I would assume that the Nancy and the Democrats want to time that to maximum political benefit. I mean, could that have some damage or some impact on the midterm elections? What do you expect could happen there?
I think the biggest wild card on that is we know what they're going to write. Okay, they're going to say they're rioters, their insurrections is the greatest threat to the country, to democracy in the last 772 years. It's terrible, blah blah blah. Right? We know that's going to happen. The Democrat theme, the narrative they're trying to do is that democracy itself is under attack, and Democrats have to get out to vote if they want to protect democracy. And obviously, for anybody who knows anything about governance, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And so consequently, that whole narrative doesn't make sense. But that's what they're going to say. And there's a lot of people who, particularly young people, who don't really know the difference between a democracy and a republic. And so that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to say the foundation of America is under attack by Republicans attempting to take control of the House and Senate. So will that work? It will work if the only way it works is if the Republicans don't effectively say that this commission's a sham. All it is the third Donald Trump impeachment attempt, and it's and as a result, the findings of the commission are neither valid nor constitutional and should be ignored, because they haven't looked into the things they should have looked into, and they've gotten no closer to knowing what actually some of the things that happened at the Capitol than they did on January 6th, truthfully. And it's because they don't want to know, because Nancy Pelosi was in charge of Capitol security. Okay, so if Capitol security failed, it was her failing. It was on her doorstep. So they're not trying to find that out. They're trying to find a way that they can try to create criminal charges against Donald Trump and against people who were in the Trump administration. And, and that's what they're doing. That's all they're doing, is this blatant partisan politics. It's gross, it's terrible, it's divisive, and it's what the Democrats do for a living.
Rick, I found a piece this morning on Hot Air by John Sexton. I love the headline, so that grabbed my attention. Democracy is not in crisis just because Democrats are losing. And I think that is exactly the point you were making, is Democrats are going to try to run on the agenda or the narrative that we have to save our democracy. And then John Sexton lays it out that basically the strategy the Democrats will be using is to label all Republicans as extremists. And just as they tried in the Virginia campaign, they tried to label the Republican candidate Glenn Youngkin as an extremist. And here's one quote here from them. Low information and swing voters are seeing local Republican representatives as distinct from the national Republican Party. She said Democrats, this is Vicky Hausman, co-founder of Forward Majority. She said Democrats must drive home that local Republicans are as extremist as the Trumpified GOP. So what are your thoughts about that strategy?
Well, when you can't talk about specific issues where you've actually done things that the public wants, you can't talk about when you don't want to talk about inflation, when you don't want to talk about immigration, when you don't want to talk about Afghanistan, when you don't want to talk about anything that's happened, you want to talk about COVID, certainly. When you don't want to talk about Build Back Better, because Build Back Better, we discovered, was actually build a broke America. So when you don't want to talk about those things, when you can't talk about any of your accomplishments as being positive, then what you want to do is you always want to make it so a fear campaign against the other guy, warranted or not. You want to talk about lofty 80,000 foot issues that people are thinking about in the ivory towers, but you don't want to talk about the issues that actually affect real people. Here's this dirty little secret. People vote on issues that really affect themselves. If you remember, there was when Bill Clinton was running against George H.W. Bush, and George H.W. Bush is coming off of the whole 9/11, the going into Afghanistan. He had 80% approval rating and 93. And I guess what it was 80% approval rating going into the election year. The Bill Clinton was featured on Time Magazine in March of the election year, using the term, this is 1992, using the term, it was George Bush and the Seven Dwarves. And the 7 Democrat candidates were called the Dwarves because they had no chance, they had no stature. Well, Bill Clinton won. Why did he win? The economy went into a mild recession. He made it about pocketbook issues. And as Paul Begala famously said, is the economy stupid? And in this instance, if inflation is raging and and people are looking around and they're saying, this is crazy when they're looking at gas pumps, when they don't feel secure, economically secure, and they're concerned about their children's education and what's happening, and they're looking around saying everything's shifted, and I don't like where it's going. They're not going to elect the guy who wants it to keep going that way. And that always works against the incumbent. And Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are going to eat the results of their rhetoric over the last 2 years. And no matter what they do, they can't make the Republicans into extremists when the people have already decided that they are, in fact, the extremists.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there, Rick, unless there's anything else you want to add. But just to summarize, morale is plummeting within the Democrats. They're in the House. More than 25, well, so far 25 of them have announced they're retiring, and Democrats expect that there will be more retirements announced in the coming weeks. So
seeing your note, you're right. Seeing your note, though, I have a question for Rick. Let's try to stump him. One proviso, no WNBA career statistic questions. Okay, I don't know anything about the WNBA. So no questions about the WNBA and trying to stump me. So that's for future reference. But yeah, we welcome questions. It's one of the things I get to do, and this is really fun. I get to go on when I go on the radio. Most of the time, I don't have an idea what the host is going to talk about, and we end up talking about all sorts of strange stuff. And the reason it's fun is because if you know what you're going to talk about already, it's kind of like, okay, I've already thought through what I'm going to say, and it's pretty straightforward and static. But when you're having an actual conversation about, different issues and different things that are going on, and you're having to come in kind of a little bit just loose and ready to just rumble, it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more interactive, and quite honestly, it's better radio. So we, not just now, but all the times, we would love to be able to get questions that we haven't prepared, because it's a lot more fun. I see Jim Burnup's got more about Richard Epps or the two bombs planted. Yeah, great question. I actually was talking this morning on the radio and brought up the bombs that were supposedly planted at the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee, and whatever happened to the guy who planted those bombs. It's amazing that with all the man hours that the FBI has put in, we haven't gotten more information on that. And quite honestly, it's one of those things that if Kevin McCarthy actually wants to push back, he should ask that question, because if somebody was trying to bomb the two party headquarters, that's really, really serious. That's an attack on the actual violent attack on the system, and that is something that real answers have to come down on, and we should know why that hasn't happened. In terms of Richard Epps, clearly there's been an intended attempt to make it so the January 6th protest, that we never talk about maybe some of the internal, whether the FBI was involved and how much the FBI was involved in the in effectively trying to get people riled up to go into the Capitol, and there's a lot of questions about that. And Richard Epps is one of those people who clearly was in the middle of the planning and organization, and he's not sitting in DC jail. And he appears to have been given a free rein. And quite honestly, there's a lot of legitimate information that indicates he might have been working with the FBI and stirring people up.
Yeah, that one has a lot of people very angry that there's been zero coverage in the mainstream media and no one's released any information about him. So thank you all for joining us. If you like what we're talking about, please subscribe to our channel here on YouTube, the Americans for Limited Government channel, or share this video, post it, give it to your friends. We really want to bring more of you into our community of freedom fighters, and just please share our videos, subscribe. And Rick, any final words?
No, I think you've done it, guys. It's your subscription. We just appreciate your participation and the involvement that you've been doing. It's we're making, what did we get, 1.7 million contacts from people into congressional and state legislative offices last year. We're going to double that this year, and we're going to double it because of you. And so we really do appreciate your engagement and all that you're doing. So this is really all about you, and we're just trying to give you information so you can talk to people about this stuff and have a baseline to talk about if you don't already have it. Thank you very much for all you do.
And Ron told us he bought one of our puzzles off of our ALG merch store. So glad you liked it, Ron. And then he tells us it looks awesome in my living room. I'm sure it triggers a lot of your liberal friends if they come over. But good for you. Thank you, Ron, for giving us that feedback. And if you haven't checked out our merch store, it's just algmerch.com. I'll put that name up because we've got a lot of fun things there. And our merchandise team is always adding new products. We've got a lot of Let's Go Brandon stuff.
The one that I got a comment from a radio guy who I'm on the air with all the time, Mike Hayes in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and he was laughing off the air. He goes, "Manning, you got I was on your merch store. It was like Make America Florida Again." Or you said that was hilarious. And
Yay.
so it's getting noticed by a lot of different people, and it's got a lot of different things on there. So and it's growing every single day. So come back and check it out. If you've been there before, come back and check it out again. There's always new stuff that we're putting up, and we do try as much as possible to source everything as U.S. made. We really try to do that because, quite honestly, it may cost a little more. But what really costs is to send our jobs overseas. And so we try to do that and as Catherine will attest, I've gotten kind of angry when I discovered that things weren't from America when we didn't know. We had no way of figuring it out. And we pulled an item that wasn't from America because it just didn't fit. And so just know that we really try to make certain that that's the case. One place we still have problems is the hats, but folks, we're working to make certain that the people who work here, the people who pay taxes here, when you buy something through the ALG merch store, it's benefiting Americans, American printers, and American clothing manufacturers and the like.
Thank you, Rick. And thanks to all of you for being a part of our organization and helping us out and supporting us. And we'll see you next time on another Americans for Limited Government live stream.